So today's Rebecca Fuel N505653 Assessment 2, my PD presentation. So today's presentation that I'm doing is on the Godwin Beach ERT task. So Term 4 is approaching and next term's material is ecology. So what I want to do is draw attention to the ERT. So based off what we're going to cover in the presentation, if it works, is so by the end of today what we're going to be looking at is ensuring that you guys understand what the ERT is. And what that means is, I can't see the screen, is making sure to show you guys how the actual task aligns with the curriculum as well as the syllabus. We're going to be looking at how it relates to the real world, so whether or not the task actually looks at, as a scientist, so the student's acting as a scientist, taking into consideration the prior knowledge and skills necessary for the task. At that same time, we're taking into account the prior knowledge the student brings to a classroom with it. And additionally, we'll be looking at the unit outline to show how we will cover off on that prior knowledge. Safety will be discussed. Safety applies to the actual field experiment or activity, rather than the safety within the classroom or the presentation today. And thirdly, we'll be looking at, which is going to be the main focus of the presentation, is implementing inquiry-based learning within the classroom. And how do you do that? Given that this is an inquiry-based assessment piece, it's critical that you know some activities that you can use to generate that within the classroom, and how do you get your students starting to think and act in that kind of way. Resources. At the end of today, each of you get a PD pack essentially to take home, which will give you a variety of resources which you can use and apply within your classroom. Examples of the activities that we're using as well. Okay, so I have chosen to sit down here with you guys just before I move on to the next slide. The whole concept of inquiry-based learning comes from the constructivist approach of teaching. So my purpose of being here is to sort of create a community, create sort of a mini group so that we can sort of work with each other rather than me being the teacher standing up in front of the class. So looking at the ERT task, specifically looking at what the students actually have to carry out. So there's two components. Part A is the actual group work, whereby the students will go out into the field to carry out the experiments and looking at the black ecosystems. So essentially what we're going to be doing is they will go to Godwin Beach. Godwin Beach was chosen on two reasons. Provides a lot more detail for the students to do their analysis in comparison to the Brisbane 2011 floods. Secondly, the kids get a lot more enjoyment out of it than in previous years when we've gone to a rainforest. It's not nearly as exciting for them. So essentially the basis behind what they're doing is doing a population distribution and abundance of the mollusk species within the ecosystem at Godwin Beach. Now, in doing that, there's a lot of, which you could already pick up, is prior knowledge that the students would have to take into consideration, which is their strip maps and how to fill out their population tables, and as well as how to actually carry out the counting and all those other aspects which we'll go into further. The second component is the individual component of the task, whereby the students are required to construct an original essay, and they need to actually use the data they obtained from the ecosystem from their field trip, and they actually need to use that to generate evidence-based reporting. Now, essentially in that, they also need to tie in the background knowledge that we teach throughout the term and tie those ideas and concepts together. You will see on the ERT task, which is a critical way for yourselves as teachers as well as the students to monitor, I suppose, the timing of it. To ensure we give the students the best opportunity to succeed, we're looking at giving them a timeline to work towards so that that is a component essentially taken off them and that they can achieve the overall outcomes. So, how does this particular assessment task align with the Australian curriculum? Specifically aligns with the Unit 1, which is the biodiversity and the interconnectedness of life. Also aligns with the Queensland syllabus documents, which aren't as important now considering that all our unit designs are based off the Australian curriculum, but it still aligns and it still ties in with it, given that the assessment pieces are based off the Australian, the Queensland syllabus. And I do have copies of those documents should anyone want to have a look at them after the presentation. So, rather than me talking, what I'd love from you guys is real world links. So you've had some time to sort of get a gist of what the ERT is. How do you think this particular task simulates what a scientist would do in the real world? Take some time, think about it, come up with an answer. When you're ready, let me know. Teamwork? Yeah?
Data collection?
Absolutely. It's a critical point. So essentially, the students are out in the field collecting the data that they need for their experiment. That is very real to what an ecologist or a biologist would do in their natural environment. They would actually carry out field studies. The main part that we are getting people to do is correctly working with each other. That's a really critical component, and that's the basis of inquiry-based learning, is how do we encourage people to work with each other and create that community. Additionally, there is the further component which ties into part B of the assessment, which is whereby we're looking at investigating ideas, problem solving, drawing valid conclusions. I'm sure you guys can read the slide and I don't need to read that to you. So, prior knowledge. Prior knowledge is a really critical component that needs to be considered and in your how you design your classes and how you design your activities that you want to carry out within those classes. So essentially, based off the ERT task, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, some components that we do need to take that students will need to know to carry out that task. And that's not just it, like you will find that as the unit outline, which we'll come across to a little bit later on, which you guys are familiar with, that there will be more activities that you would need to tie in to the prior knowledge for the students to achieve the outcome. So part A specifically looks at what is a transect and why are they used. Now, a lot of the time the transect will be laid out by one or two of the teachers, starting from up at the rocky platform down to the shoreline. The students won't actually have to do that, but the whole concept is explaining to them working either side of that transect line so that they can gain the distance, because the transect already provides how far from the starting point to the end point they're actually looking at. How to use a quadrat. I think that's probably important, even though it's a 1 metre by 1 metre square object, it might be something that's quite foreign. Not being gender biased or anything, but girls, unlike boys, might be involved in as much hands-on experience and might be unfamiliar with how to pull that out and deal with that. Within that quadrat, we're looking at how to count the species. So what we're looking at is, a quadrat is the 1 metre by 1 metre square, and you wouldn't expect, if you've got a whole square full of mud blocks, that the students are actually counting every mud block that's within that. What you would want them to do is count a particular section and then determine how many of those sections within that square and multiply, so it's a lot easier for them to do that counting. It's also a lot less time consuming for them. Completing the population distribution table and the strip maps. Part B relates to the criteria rubrics, and essentially that is available in your handout material, and I'll get you guys to have a look at that a bit later on. But it ties in with the whole basis behind the students linking the concepts which are being discussed in class and through their research and drawing those concepts together and identifying relationships and how they interrelate. The whole concept of collecting and organising their data and producing their graphs is another component that gets analysed, and then tying the first two components, so the ideas and concept together with the data that they're collected to generate an evidence-based drawn conclusion, which is what a scientist would do in the real world. So, unit outline, you guys are familiar with. First 5 weeks cover off on the background knowledge that's essential for the students. What you do need to consider in doing that is, it is an inquiry-based learning. So, how much knowledge is enough? How much knowledge is too much? So, sort of treading that line whereby you want to give them the background knowledge and the basis, but not obviously giving all the links and that, we're helping your students generate those links by asking them through questions and building that environment within your classroom. So, safety. This is where all the fun begins. This information is available in the field books. And the reason why I'm laughing is because on previous excursions, there's always someone who hurts themselves. There's always someone who will go outside of the areas that they need to go into. There's always someone who will somehow end up with no shoes at the end of the day because it's stuck in the mud and all those kinds of things. So as much as implementing safety is a critical component, is necessary for us to do, you will on the day have to deal with minor situations that will arise. I suppose the main one that I haven't covered off at this point in time is need to work within groups of 3 to 4, and they actually do need to be within their own classes. We have tried in the past of letting the students pick groups 3 to 4 outside of other classes, and the problem that arises with that is creates a lot of disruption when they have to come back after school because classes don't run at the same time, or because someone's up on level 3 and someone's down on level 1 and they have to trek between the two. We've had instances where students haven't obtained all of the information because of laziness or time not matching up. So making sure your students are choosing within their own class. A key one is, it's a bit conflicting here where we say no, put your hand under a rock, but if you're going to lift the rock up, make sure you put it back gently. I think the key one there that we need to explain to the students is using a stick or some form of object to actually get the rock up so that you can examine what's underneath it rather than putting your own hands underneath and lifting up and risking coming in contact with a crab or something like that that you may or may not want to. And I think the main thing we need to remember is by the end of the 3 days, the environment is absolutely trash. The footprints, the homes, the little niches, the habitats, everything like that is being destroyed through human impact. And I think that's something that we can highlight to the student in minimising how much damage they actually do to the environment by maintaining to that transect line and not sort of trekking all across the environment and reducing that damage that can happen. So this is where I stop talking and you guys actually get to do some things and have some fun. So the activities that I've looked into is how do you create an inquiry-based environment within your classrooms? It's not always easy. There's a lot of research out there that shows that teachers find it stressful, they find it challenging, they get fear at the idea of having to implement this within their classroom. It's not nearly as complex as it could be, but I suppose that will depend upon your comfortability. And I suppose the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. So I've sort of provided you an overview of how an inquiry-based lesson can run. And the first component is the introduction. Now, you'll find on my handouts as I proceed, I've listed it as engage and explore. I've chosen to use different terms for the purpose of that's what appeals to me as an individual, but you don't have to. So the whole purpose behind it is you're trying to capture the interest of the students. Do that with a picture, do that with a diagram, do that with a handout, materials in the back of the classroom, something whereby immediately draws the attention of the students and they want to know more. That is a great way to engage your students. What you do want to do is outline the activity. You want to make sure your instructions are clear, they're specific, you're not using ambiguous words, you're not using vague words, and what that will do is the students will actually understand what outcomes you're actually trying to achieve within the classroom. And the third point is obviously your advanced organisers, where you're looking at how much time they have and what the expected outcomes are of the activity. The second component is the student activity, and you'll actually find this will take up the majority of the lesson that you will undertake. And this I refer to as the explore. This is where the student gets to have hands-on and gets to play and gets to engage with the activity and draw those conclusions and understand what they need to do. So your job at this point in time is to still be the teacher within the classroom, but you're now more of a facilitator. You're there to help the students with their discussion and challenge what they're thinking, push them that little bit further, help them develop that higher order thinking. And then the third component is the conclusion. And to me, this is the explain stage. It is suggested that you do this through getting the students to share their results or their response or whatever it is that they've concluded and they understand. And rather than giving them a response where you define whether it's right or it's wrong, you enable the students to come up with it. And you do that through questioning. That is a style and a strategy that as a teacher we do have to learn inquiry-based learning. And it is something that you will need to learn to do to keep your lessons going and keep the lesson on track. So we're going to do activity 1. So essentially I've chosen 2 activities. One relates to part A, one relates to part B of the assessment piece. What this is essentially we're preparing the students for the actual activities they'll undertake out in the field. So I'm engaging with my students. Straight away, I'm providing pictures. They want to know more. They still want to know more. What's going on? How is this a real life situation? What's happening in here? What is that? If you didn't know what that is, you probably would think, well, she got that picture up there. And then, again, what is that picture? What's happening down the bottom here? So your task to do today is to examine the photos. You guys have been given a copy of the photos. And what I want you to do is use the photos and the field studies booklet, which you have also, and identify the different mollusks in the photos. You will need to decide on a scrub. That's another handy tip that you can provide to your students for their group work. Assign them tasks, assign them different roles within that group work so that they do it effectively and efficiently. So you guys have 10 minutes to come up with the activity. What's right with you?
Okay.
What's right? We're spending up 2 minutes.
What is that? Something.
What's that?
It's a muggle.
Just make something.
It's a muggle.
The head's the minute. What are they?
It's one of those little ones.
You're the same ones, aren't
No, you're cheating.
they? No, I'm not. Look, oysters. Vale, por qué?
That one?
Mhm.
This one.
It is my dog.
It's different. This one. That's the one.
What's the difference between that one and the other one?
And then you're asking me questions. See? Pretty hard. This one. Doesn't say.
The only difference between the two is you can only tell by the inside colouring of them.
Oh, that's the difference between them. Yeah.
So between whether you've got the Australian or the other mud rock is the colouring of the inside of the shell. And you'd have to pull a mollusk out. Essentially what you'd be looking at.
Yeah, we shall.
And you do not want to encourage that into
Bro.
students. So essentially what we have done in the past is if it's not clearly identifiable that you can work out whether it's which mud rock it is, you just put it down as a mud rock and then justify it after the fact when you're doing
Okay, so
graphs.
it's still a muggle. Which one are you looking at here? Which one are you looking at there? That one? Maybe.
He's painted.
Doesn't he? Thanks, Frank. Don't say it right. He definitely eats plankton. Because it's definitely him.
What about some?
It's a oyster.
Oh, that's a oyster.
But he's. See? Well, this is where we have problems. Which one's which?
That's one we're going.
Yeah.
Did you pair with me?
Yes, let's go on the third one.
This one.
Which one?
That one.
I don't think we're on to that one yet.
What about that one then?
Maybe
Well,
on
they look
the
like mud rocks to me.
sand.
And a bit of water. Probably some mud.
Yes, dear. I think that's eelgrass.
Well, there you go.
So that's probably something that that is to comment on, is that isn't actually in the field study booklet.
To grass.
No, so it is something that you do raise in the class, but it isn't within the booklet. So as a task, obviously, if you were to provide your students more pictures or real life samples, if they're available within the environment, then we can obviously get them to be hands-on, and this activity can take, and what you can do is get them to investigate that information, so finding out a little bit more information about them as an extension of the inquiry process, and getting the students to link, well, here's the actual specimen in the environment, why is it where it is, and why would it be situated here, and sort of drawing those conclusions already prior to actually getting out into the field and understanding that. Okay, so it takes a lot less time, I suppose, for us as teachers to carry out this as an activity in comparison to your students without that prior knowledge and without that scientific capacity. You would give them the opportunity to really explore that as a concept and to do that within groups and talk to each other. So the third step that we were talking about before was, anyone remember? The third step of inquiry-based learning?
Engage? No. Explain.
No, and then single.
Explain.
Okay. Yeah, so it is explain. So it's the explain or the conclusion component of the inquiry-based lesson, whereby you're doing it with the questions and the discussions and getting those students in there. So the first part that you could do is, what results did you get? I've taken the time to highlight some already for you guys based off the information you guys already have. So we've got the mudrock and the charted. We've got more mudrocks. What you will actually find is after the floods, a lot of species diversity actually dropped off. There were a lot of mudrocks. Obviously, they were able to predominate in that environment, hence the reason why there's so many pictures of mudrocks, because that's what's available. We've got oysters, barnacles, we have a periwinkle. It seems strange that this periwinkle is located on a rock, which is actually close to the lower littoral zone. I would anticipate periwinkles to be located towards the upper and mid littoral zones. And then you obviously got your eelgrass and your mudbox. So the second component of your explain, once you go through getting the students to share the answers with you, is getting them to, through questions, I suppose, to work out, like one of the questions I just raised, which is why was the eelgrass, why is it located, and I've actually made the mistake by putting in the upper littoral zone when it's down in the lower littoral zone. So why is it in the lower littoral zone, or why is it in the upper littoral zone? Do you even have to define what that littoral zone is? Can you get the students to define that and extend on why it would be located down there? Other questions that you can consider is, why would oysters and barnacles, where would oysters and barnacles be located? You know, trying to get them to conclude what kind of species you would anticipate in the upper, lower and mid zones. Asking open-ended questions, so that the students can draw on their existing information, the materials and resources that are available to them at their hands, so they can use that to answer the questions within the class. So I think the key point we need to remember is that it's getting, our job as a facilitator in inquiry-based learning is, how do we get the students to develop the answers rather than us giving them the answers, so that they can make those connections and develop that higher level thinking. So we're going to do activity 2, which you guys have, and I don't know when I was searching for mine. So, as I was talking before, activity 2 relates to part B of the assessment task. And essentially, the students are required to interpret the data, manipulate the data, and draw conclusions. This on a, I would say on a very simplified basis, requires the students to actually undertake this but it gives them the literacy and numeracy skills that they need to actually carry out the task at a later date. So, engage. This is something you can start with. This is a picture. It's got writing, it's got a picture up there. You might have people start pointing out to you that based off on the prevailing wind and swell directions that your diagram is not accurate. You might have students highlighting all sorts of information based off what you put up there. That doesn't matter. The whole point is that that student's engaged in your lesson. They're looking at it, they're examining what's going on. That student is interested in what you're presenting to them. So your task is to, using the information provided on the handouts that I've given to you, is to answer the questions. Again, you need a scribe, and you have 10 minutes.
You're scribing this one.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
You have to try. Big. Can we get some more explanation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where do we find this information?
Right, so this information is provided here. So based off, read these little blurbs, they actually describe particular features about, it's probably not the best slide, I do apologise, I can blow it up on a bigger picture if you need me to. That information is available, and then it describes particular features about each of the species.
You just need your glasses so you can read it.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Do you want me to provide it to you bigger?
Okay, so hang on, so side A is the exposed rocky shores.
Yep.
The Pilcate and brown barnacles that were found together in exposed rocky shores. On more sheltered shores, the columnar barnacle is more prevalent. Okay, and oysters prey on the brown barnacles. Okay, so the oysters are found there because they live there. Is that right?
Yeah, there you go.
It's very
Yeah.
Explain
apologise.
why more oysters were found at site A. Because the brown barnacles are living there?
Do you think
Because it was
that's...
in a different environment.
Yeah. So what is side A?
Site A to site B is a different environment.
So
Based on the wind direction and wave direction, everything's going to be different.
To site A.
Site B.
yeah.
So the water turbulence, even potentially the temperature will be different.
So is there, off this information here, is there a particular feature that describes here, I'll read it to you. It says rocky oysters often grow on steepy slopes or vertical surfaces. So is site A steepy slope?
Yes.
Tend to flourish in harbours as settlement on rocks is inhibited by even moderate wave actions. So do you have a lot of wave action taking place at site A?
Yes, there's a lot of wave action, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Hmm.
Okay, so if you've got a lot of wave action taking place at site A, and oysters particularly like that because they adhere to the rocks through cementing themselves on, and obviously having stuff on the rocks would inhibit that, would you therefore likely to find more oysters at site A or site B?
Site A.
Yeah.
That makes sense, okay.
Okay. So what was the next question?
Oops. Which hypothesis is appropriate for the field study?
So it's your field study. You can choose whichever hypothesis you want.
You
You can take the paper.
can I go through the full explanation?
You can go through whatever you would like. This is the whole point of an inquiry-based learning, is for you to investigate it.
So the hypothesis attached to this. It's not about the topography.
No, because there's no on the map. Yep.
It's not about the water temperature.
Yep, because we don't have no idea about the water temperature.
The wave actions cause differences in communities on rocky shores.
Well, we know that's true.
Or the communities of intertidal animals differ between exposed rocky shores and sheltered rocky communities.
Well, that's true too.
But we're talking about intertidal animals differing. So I think that one's the correct one.
Okay.
If that is your justified, if that is your hypothesis based off your explanation, then that's fine. If you can justify it, doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. The whole point of a hypothesis is justification and proving that at the end of the day. So, or disproving it to the other side of it. Alright. So that as an inquiry-based lesson for the students, as you guys saw, it made you have to question, refer back to other documents, consider, explain. That's the whole concept. It forces the student to investigate what it is that they're actually looking into, making them think and draw those conclusions based off the information that they have. It doesn't matter ultimately at the end of the day whether the answer is right or wrong, because that isn't what we're looking into. The point of this investigation is to get to the student to develop the right answer through the appropriate ways. The ultimate idea behind this is to not give the answer whether it's right or wrong, to return, when they answer the question, return with another question and constantly throw a question at them and let them develop whether or not they get the answers right. There's a lot of positives and negatives to that. A lot of people feel uncomfortable doing that, some others feel it's okay. So that's completely up to you as a teacher as to what you want to do. So the second component to this, which we're obviously not undertaking today, is a graphing exercise, which directly relates to their population data that they obtain and graphing that and identifying the trends. And I think if you do that with your students, you would designate a whole lesson to actually enable them to carry out that as a task. So again, we're at the conclusion or the explain component of our lesson. And what you want to do is, again, we're looking at what results did they get. You're going to find that students will get different results, different answers. Your job as the teacher is to sort of redirect those questions back to the class. So, Jimmy, why did you come up with the answer that you've come up with? Isabel. So you come up with a different answer, Jimmy. Why did you come up with your answer, and how does that differ to the process that Jimmy's undertaken to come up with his answer? Getting the students to understand that investigative process. Some questions that I sort of cleaned in that you can actually look at is the oysters are more abundant on side A, and why is that the case? And essentially the information wasn't available, but if you've done adaptations with the students prior, that they would know that oysters produce a compound which cements themselves to the rock. So given that the wave action is constantly clearing those rocks off, they'll be able to cement and connect to those rocks and obviously stay there once they're cemented. So that could be the reason why. And what are the species of the filter feeders? Why are they on site A? And like, a lot of that has to do with the constant wave action, so we're looking at the nutrients and oxygen. And again, you would get the students to develop those answers to get to that point. And you keep asking the question. Okay, so that is an inquiry-based lesson. And I've given you 2 examples of how you can carry out one. Before we finish this presentation, I just want to take some time to sort of point out the positives as to why an inquiry-based lesson is ideal, and why we can actually, as teachers, should start questioning whether we want to undertake it or not, and how beneficial it can be to our classroom. So probably the biggest point is it's the whole concept of the power shift from the classroom. Teachers used to stand at the front of the class and be the wealth of giver and give all the facts and the information to our students. By turning it to an inquiry-based lesson, we're starting to generate a classroom to be student-based. The students have to come up with the answers. The students are the ones with the information. You're there as the facilitator to help them to get to those answers and get to those conclusions and during that process. I suppose the second component is about, we're providing that real-world application, that connectedness to the fact that school isn't one sort of bubble that exists here, and when I leave school there's a completely different bubble that I go to. School and once you leave school actually have something to do with each other now, and we're overlaying those and giving them that reality of creating scientific literate citizens within our classrooms. We're also challenging the existing knowledge that students have, so that enables students to construct their meaning, their understanding of what they do. A student will come with a prior knowledge. If you say to someone, we're going to a mudflat environment, we're going up to Godwin Beach, you ask them to come up with another one, they might come up with Brighton. Brighton mightn't have mollusks. They might have never seen a mollusk in their life. They might even know it's a mollusk. They might think it's just a shell, because that's how they often see them on beaches, just empty shells. So how do you interrupt those existing knowledge to exchange it and build on that knowledge to create new connections, which is creating that collective understanding. I think the key thing that we do need to do is using technical knowledge, but explaining that technical knowledge to the students as well the first time that we use it in the classroom, and constantly using it, because in the world of a scientist, they do use that technical knowledge, and it is involved in the converse, or involved in the conversation. So the third component that we're looking at is really engaging our students. So if we can engage our students and give them some interest, we'll motivate our students as to undertaking the tasks that are at hand. They'll actually probably be more interested. And I think at the same time that we do that by group work. So the whole concept is, as individuals, we socially respond to each other a lot better. Group work gives that ability for students to interact with each other socially, as well as creating a community within that classroom, and in turn giving that an identity. So when creating that group identity is important for students within their environments. So that's the gist of today's presentation. I hope you found it interesting. The stuff that you guys can take home and apply to your classrooms and to your individual students. This is the package that you get to take home with you, so that you guys can peruse the material prior to the students getting it for their assessment piece. And I thought I'd end on a happy note that you guys will eventually be checking it out in the mud. And maybe bring a spare set of clothes, because students fall over and will take you down with them. So thanks again for your time. And stop it.